Tonight's story is part 2 in a fantastic series by James Williams. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share, it really does help with the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. If you have a story you'd like to share with us here on the show, please do get it over to me on the website, which of course is www.DMTForestOfFear.com. And go to the submit story or report page. I look forward to hearing from you. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Fighting for My Life on the Bladen Lakes, The Return to Black River. Let's get straight into that. After my fight with the Dogman, I was in hospital for several days due to my injuries and loss of blood. I pulled through, and after several weeks laid up at home, I was well enough to move about more freely. I still bear the scars and have a permanent limp, but for the most part I have moved on with my life. I still love the outdoors, camping, hiking, hunting and fishing, though rarely alone and never without a high-powered rifle on hand. You know, as they say about falling off bikes and horses, you just got to get back on. On that note, when the anniversary of my encounter came up, I decided I would slip back out there, even though it was off limits by everyone but the landowners. I figured I'd get some form of closure and could relax more when I found myself out in the wilderness. So I grabbed a couple of guns and headed out for what was to be a very short visit, maybe a few minutes at most. As I pulled into the clearing, I stopped and gripped the steering wheel nervously. I was considering turning around right then and there and leaving. No, I had to do this, and so I psyched myself up and opened the door, stepping out and taking a deep breath. I stayed by the open door to my car and listened. I could hear the normal sounds of birds chirping and squirrels rustling. I relaxed a bit and figured all was well and stepped away from my car, shutting the door. I walked over to where my camper had been flipped, my car totaled, and where my showdown with the Dogman took place. It looked exactly as it had when I first came here, like nothing had ever happened. I touched my chest and felt the thin lumps of scar tissue that ran down my torso, a reminder that it had in fact happened. And finally, I gave a look around the area, glad that I had done this since now I felt more at ease. That feeling went away when I noticed something a bit out of place. Jammed in a tree by the bank of the river was my spear blade. I went over and looked at it closer, noting the rust on the exposed edge before I pulled it from the tree. It was then that a howl split the silence that had fallen over the area. Instantly, I bolted for my car, tossing the blade in as soon as the door opened, followed by myself. I barely closed the door when the engine roared to life and I was kicking up dirt and dust as I peeled out of there faster than I ever had gone before. My heart raced and the pounding it was making caused my hearing to blot out for a moment as I swerved and swung around the turns of the dirt road. As I reached the blacktop, I looked into my rearview mirror in time to see a large figure go from all fours to standing upright, only to vanish as a tree broke my line of sight when I turned onto the paved road. The Poacher and the Dogman. Mark Wiggins was a 54-year-old divorcee with 3 kids. He wasn't a particularly great father figure and had been a worse husband. He fancied himself as a hunter, but the truth was, he was nothing more than a poacher. Lacking decent hunting grounds himself, he took to visiting other people's properties and to see if he could land a trophy buck and pack his freezer while he was at it. And this year he found himself in the backwoods of Black River, seeking a bit of land that was well known for big bucks. He'd heard of a bear attack this year before, but he wasn't worried. His only concern was getting caught. He pulled onto a dirt path that seemed to still have some dust settling and hoped he wasn't about to come up on someone already out here. It would be hard to explain why he was in a patch of woods not his own, dressed in full hunting attire. To his luck, there was no one there when he pulled into the clearing. His best guess is that whoever had just left must have been out for a morning hunt and had gone for the day. Still, he figured it would be best if he just scouted around and come back another time if he found plenty of sign of game. Once parked by the edge of the river, Mark got out of his pickup and took the rifle from the window rack, loading a round into the chamber. Walking around the area, he looked high and low for clues as to where the hunting stand or ground blind might be hidden. He searched for a sign of deer, but there didn't seem to be any around the clearing. Maybe a bit further in, he thought to himself, and found what looked to be a well-worn path heading into the forest. Covering his nose and mouth, he pressed on and found himself stepping out into another clearing. It was half the size of the one he'd left his truck, and all around were bones and remains of animals, mostly deer. There also seemed to be remnants of 3 campfires, long extinguished, but the black patches and charred wood was still there. He thought this was odd, since they were so close together. Why would anyone do this? And then he noticed something else. An overturned tree with a hole dug under it seemed to be a lair of whatever had made this place home. Naturally, the stench here was overwhelming. It was at that moment he heard a limb snap somewhere close by, and all other sounds stopped as a low growl rumbled all around him. He clicked the safety off his rifle and took a step back so he could make a hasty retreat, but bumped into something. His face scrunched into confusion as he knew there hadn't been a tree there before, since he was backstepping in his own tracks. Hot, stinking breath blew past his head as a growl bellowed right behind him, making him turn around and come face to face with the muzzle of the beast. The Dogman roared and Mark screamed, swinging his gun up to fire, but it was knocked away and the shot went wide. At the same time, a clawed hand raked his face and neck, severing his carotid artery and sending a spray of red over the area. Mark collapsed to the ground from the blow and tried to crawl away, his pleading voice distorted and gurgled from blood. The Dogman dropped to all fours and stood on the man's back, holding him down as he leaned down and bit into his shoulder, lifting him up and giving him a shake, tearing flesh away before the arm was completely removed at the collarbone. His screams, which barely made it to the clearing he'd parked his truck in, soon fell silent when the Dogman bit into his neck and crushed his spinal cord in a single crunch. A trip to the Bladen Lakes. I never told anyone about that near miss, as I was technically trespassing. I knew that would be where the focus was, rather than the fact that the beast was still out there. And besides, no one would believe me anyway. That was several months ago, and since then I've been camping several times, making it a bi-weekly event. Yet I never went back to the area where my fight had taken place, or any other part of the river for that matter. I wasn't going to take the chance of that thing finding me again. Instead, I gave it a wide berth, going to some land owned by a friend of mine, or to the Jones Lake State Park, part of the Bladen Lake State Forest. That was where I was heading for the weekend trip, just after the New Year. It was going to be cold, but that was how I liked it. I had taken an extra day off work, so I'd have a 3-day weekend. I had plenty of leftovers from New Year's Eve parties, and a cooler of sodas, water, and sports drinks. As a state park, it was open to the public, had established camping spots for rent, and was patrolled by park rangers. The only downside was that firearms were not permitted on the grounds, and despite this being a law, I did keep my refurbished Mosin under the back seat of my car with a box of armor-piercing rounds and, of course, I brought my spear. When I got to the campground, it was completely empty. It seemed that I would have the whole place to myself. I smiled, as the solitude would be a nice change to being around other people. That was soon dashed as a group showed up and set up into the spot right across from mine. I wasn't thrilled by this, but I figured I could just ignore them and hope that they weren't the rowdy type. "Howdy, friend," one of them spoke up, crushing the idea of being able to ignore them. I gave a wave and smiled politely, and the man made his way over, introducing himself and his friends. In all, there were 7 of them, 2 couples, Julie and Robert, Thomas and Sarah, 2 single guys, Mike and Keith, who were brothers, and a single girl, Rebecca, or Becca, as she liked to be called. It was around that time that the park ranger stopped by to check us in and take payment for the campsites. He informed us that he had drawn the short straw and would be the only one on duty that weekend, but if we needed anything, to just call the station. And through the ensuing conversations and observation with my fellow campers, I learned that they were all in their late 20s. The guys were all fit as well as Julie and Sarah. The couples were from well-to-do families, the country club types. The brothers were farm boys, though if they had worked the fields for more than a day, I'd eat my hat. Becca was more like me, a bit on the heavy side, came from a modest background, and didn't seem to have very much luck with relationships. She didn't really want to come but was pressured into it by others as a way to get her mind off her most recent ex. I could tell that Mike had a thing for her, but she wasn't into him at all. Eventually, they decided that they had better get their campsite set up and left me alone once again. Forced to leave home. After losing a fight with his alpha, the Dogman found himself banished from the pack to find his own territory. He settled on an area with plenty of game and water resources to sustain him. He had discovered a human in his new territory and attempted to kill him. The shot to his head had glanced off, or the fight would have ended right then. Now he found himself struggling to get ashore, and finally pulling himself onto the bank. He still couldn't pull the spear blade out. The pain was just too great. Until the object was removed, his healing factor couldn't repair the damage. He passed out, and by the time he had awoken, it was night, and his other wounds were nearly healed. By some miracle, he hadn't died, though he could feel himself getting weaker. On top of that, and the fight had cost him an eye and his pride. He had been cocky, toying with the human and let his guard down, a mistake he wouldn't make again. He snarled, heading back to find his intended victim and finish the job. And when he got there, though, the area was empty. The scent of several humans hung over the clearing, and it was obvious that his quarry had been taken away. Part of him hoped that the man had died, thus making him the winner in the end. But it also hoped that the human had lived and would return. And with a growl, he yanked the spear out, yelping as it hurt like hell to do so, and then jammed the blade into the tree. This would serve to be a marker that he was still there, and a reminder of the mistake he had made. He waited for weeks and months, but eventually gave up on the notion that a human would return. Still, this was good hunting grounds, and he was mostly undisturbed, and so he set out to mark his borders. After some time, he had it all but forgotten about the human. He had almost lost his life, too. It was a year later, and he was resting in his den when the wind brought the scent of the human, and his ears perked up. It had been a long time, but he never fully forgotten the smell of him. Stepping out, he gave a sniff. And, in the excitement, he let out a howl. He raced to the clearing, but was too late. A plume of dust was all that was left there, and the chase was on. Taking a shortcut through the woods, he tried to cut the human off, but failed to catch up before the car left off onto the black stone path and took off. He was fast, but not that fast, nor could he hold out the chase for that long with one lung being weaker than the other. He dropped back to all fours and slowly headed for home. The sound of another vehicle caught his attention. As a truck pulled in, following it to the clearing, he watched as an older human got out and headed off into the woods towards his den. After killing this trespasser, he went back and pushed the truck over the edge of the bank and into the deep water in an attempt to hide it. It failed to sink all the way, and a few days later, a fisherman reported it, and Mark's body was discovered soon after. Now, humans were combing the area, and since there were too many for him to fight on his own, he had no choice but to leave. This meant he'd probably never get to exact revenge, but it was better than dying. He headed west, travelling at night when it wasn't likely that he would be spotted, eventually finding himself an unclaimed area with several lakes and a vast expanse of forest. Little did he know, he would get another chance to get revenge after all. Campfire stories. It was rather comical watching the others try to set up their tents. The only one that seemed to have a grasp on the idea was Becca, though she was too having a bit of trouble. My camper had a flat tire and the spare wouldn't hold air, so I was sleeping in a tent, this go around as well. Mine was up in just a few minutes, so I went over and offered to help them out. "Thanks, man, that was mighty kind of you," Keith said with a smile, once we were finished. "No problem," I replied and started to walk away when one of them asked if I could help them with getting a fire going. I thought it odd that they couldn't manage it, but then again, it made sense, given their skill at putting up a tent. They were amazed at how easy it was with a flint and steel and a small amount of tinder. Soon their fire was going good, and I was off to get mine going too. I was later invited over for supper, and though I had planned to eat some leftovers, the smell of the venison stew they were cooking made it hard to resist. I made sure my fire was low so it wouldn't get out of control while I was away and headed over to the site to await supper. Even though alcohol wasn't permitted on the grounds, Mike and Keith had brought some mason jars of homemade moonshine. "Hey guys, don't get caught with that. You don't want to get banned," I said, and they laughed. "Come on, man, lighten up," Mike said and held a jar out to me. I put up a hand. "No thanks, I don't drink," I said, declining the offer, and everyone looked at me in disbelief. "Seriously?" Julie asked as she took the glass and sipped from it. Seriously, I don't care for the taste and I don't see the appeal of getting drunk," I replied with a shrug. The couples and brothers all gave a little laugh. Becca, on the other hand, only smiled in an understanding way. When supper was done cooking, we all fixed our bowls and got sodas from the cooler. There was joking and laughing the whole time we were eating, and I was beginning to like this new group of friends. "Hey, who's got a scary story?" Robert asked, and we were all excited to see who had one to offer. Thomas chimed up and told a paranormal story he'd heard online. I'll admit, it was rather chilling, but I had lived through worse. Sarah was next, but her story was, well, kind of weak, more humorous than scary. "What about you?" Keith asked, taking me off guard, and all heads turned to me. "Well, I started but pursed my lips. "No," I said. "Oh, come on, you do, don't you?" Mike said excitedly, and everyone else joined in, egging me on. With a heavy sigh, I nodded and started, telling about the fight with the Dogman. By the end, everyone was on the edge of their seats, eyes fixed on me. In the distance, I heard a howl. I said as if on cue. A howl was let off from deep in the woods that made the girls and a couple of the guys scream. They all broke out laughing, but I only looked off into the direction it had come from. Could it be? I thought to myself, but it was broken when Becca spoke up. "That was good." "Thanks," I said with a small smile. "Almost sounded real," she replied with a smile that faded. Actually, it was real. That happened about a little more than a year ago, 25 miles east of here on Black River, I said, and everyone went silent. "Yeah, right," Robert remarked, and everyone except Becca started laughing again. My eyes narrowed as I thought about showing them the scars, but it was probably better that everyone believe it to be just a story. My eyes narrowed as I thought about showing them my scars, but it was probably better that they believe it to be just a story. The Nightmare. We all went to bed not long after that, though some of us didn't go to sleep right away. In the relative silence of the night, I could hear at least one of the couples trying to be quiet as they went at it. When they were done, all I could hear were the crickets. I closed my eyes and soon fell asleep. I was awakened some time later to what sounded like sniffing around my tent. Blinking a few times, I quietly got to my knees and lifted my spear from under my covers. A snarl let out behind me, and the fabric wall split open. The beast was on me, fangs clamping into my side of my neck before I could even try to defend myself. Blood spurted everywhere as it ripped the flesh from my neck, its clawed hands ripping open with ease. Sitting up, screaming, I drew the spear blade from its sheath and swung at it at an empty space before me. I breathed heavily, sweat beading down my forehead, as I realized it was only a nightmare. "Hey, you okay, man?" Thomas called out in the dark. "Yeah, bad dream, I'm sorry," I replied and laid back down. I didn't sleep well for the rest of the night, tossing and turning under my covers, shivering even though I had plenty of warmth. I gave up just as the sun started filtering through the trees and stepped out into the cold morning air. I jumped when I saw a figure sitting by my fire pit, which had apparently been restarted. It was Becca, and she was wrapped up in a blanket, curled up in my chair. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, making my way over to her. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "Yeah," she lied, wiping her face. I raised a brow and pulled up a stump to sit on. "You're sitting at a stranger's fire, crying. What's wrong?" I asked again. "My boyfriend dumped me last week. Said I was fat and ugly," she said with a shaky voice. My jaw clenched. Sounds like a real charmer. His loss, in my opinion, I said and smiled. She smiled back. "So, why are you over here instead of by your own fire?" I asked. She blushed and looked away. "To be honest, I was going to slip into your tent last night, but I never just hooked up before, so I chickened out and just sat here," she admitted, and I chuckled. "I'd have asked you to buy me dinner first," I said, and she broke out into a cute giggle. We talked for a while longer, until we heard her friend starting to stir. Figuring she better head back before they got the wrong idea, we exchanged numbers and her Facebook info to keep in touch. I smiled at the thought that we might hit it off as more than friends some time later. I fixed my breakfast and ate alone with my lazy neighbours, dragging themselves out of bed. We all got together again and hung out that day as well, but they weren't staying a second night. They broke camp and we all said our goodbyes. And just before they piled into their car, Becca ran over to me, giving me a big hug and a light kiss on the cheek. The others ahed and awed at her, except for Mike, who gave me a dirty look, while I grinned and returned a kiss. As I did, she whispered into my ear, "I believe you," and then went on to get in the car. After they left, I was alone once again, which I didn't mind, as that had been the plan anyway. The difference now was that I had someone to chat with through texting or messenger. As the sun drifted down, I threw together a quick supper and turned in early, planning to go on a hike in the morning. The hike to Salters Lake. Like the morning before, I got up just as the sun broke through the trees and started breaking camp. I pulled my car into the main parking lot, packing a few sports drinks and a sandwich for lunch when I took a break. I had walked this trail twice before and was looking for a third go at it. I stuck the sheathed spear blade into my pack and carried the pole as a walking stick until I was down to the trail a ways. Locking up my car as I started off, crossing the park area and entering the tree-covered walkway on the left side of the park. If all went well, I'd be coming out on the right side in just a few hours. Once I was down the trail, I slipped my pack off and pulled the blade out, leaving the cover on for safety, and stuck it on the pole. With my pack back on, I was off once more, taking it easy on my knee, which always ached a little since my encounter, but wasn't so bad that I couldn't make it. All was going great, and as I got to the halfway marker of the trail to Salters Lake, I branched off to my left. It was an open area, and the trail doubled as an access road for the park services. Part of me wanted to just stay on the main trail, keep it short and sweet. I really should have listened to my instincts as I veered left and headed deeper into the forest, not knowing what waited for me at the end of the trail. The Dogman had been in his new territory for a few weeks, having dug himself a new den hole under the upturned roots of an old oak. He had settled in nicely, with a lake for drinking water and plenty of small game to keep it fed and entertained. He was stalking a deer not too far from his new home when the wind changed direction, carrying his scent right to the prey, sending it bolting away. He let out a growl in frustration, preparing to give chase, and when it took a sniff, wiped his head around to face the wind. The human was here. When I reached the end of the trail, there was a picnic table, fire pits and logs in a small clearing just a few yards from the water's edge. My knee was hurting pretty bad by now, and so I decided to stop for lunch and take a load off. It was lunchtime anyway, and I would need something on my stomach to go with the painkillers I had brought. I built a fire for nothing more than the warmth of it, pulled my sandwich out as well as one of the sports drinks, Sitting on the table facing my fire, my spear sitting on the table next to me, it was quite peaceful. I was almost done with my meal when I noticed something. It had gone quiet. Too quiet. My eyes widened and I scanned the area. And though I was surrounded by forest, it was fairly open and I had a long field of view. Oh no, not again. My heart raced as I tried to figure out what it was that caused everything to go so quiet. Coyotes. A bear. Or was it something worse? I wasn't waiting around to find out. After putting out the fire, I gathered my things and unsheathed the spear, heading back down the trail as quick as I could. There were some places that were a bit of a worry, as the trail was narrow and the brush was thick, making it hard to see anything coming until it was right on you. The upside was that there was too much debris for whatever it was to sneak up on me, and I would stop at any time I heard a noise. Now and then a branch would snap, or I think I heard a growl or sniffing. When I turned to face whatever it was, there'd be nothing. I managed to make it back out to the main trail, taking a moment to catch my breath. The Dogman had passed his den. Oh, for fuck's sake! I managed to make it back out to the main trail, taking a moment to catch my breath. The Dogman had passed his den and located a human sitting on a table. Temptation built, as all he could do was not charge right there or let out a howl. He had made that mistake before, but this time he was going to stalk and take him by surprise if he could. Every time he would get close, the human would seem to sense his approach and turn with that damn spear. He hated that spear. It had been the thing that almost killed him last time, and so he was wary of it now. Coming to the edge of the thicket, there was no way to ambush him now. It would be a short run to take him down, but it was enough time for that weapon to be pointed its way. He watched and waited for an opening, but eventually eagerness and pride got the better of him as he stood up on his hind legs and walked out into the clearing and let out a howl of mighty proportions. Standing in the middle of the wide dirt road, I panted and rubbed my aching knee. The meds and adrenaline that had helped me out power walking over the rough path had taken its toll. Whatever it was that was following me seemed to be holding back inside the tree line. I looked down the trail and knew that the hiking path would go down into the woods again. It's something I was not going to attempt. No. Instead, I was going to stick to this wide road until I made it out to the highway at the far end. And from there, I could hitch a hike back to the park and get my car. As a last resort, I could call the rangers for assistance, and to be honest, I probably should have just done that to start with. I didn't want to endanger their lives if I didn't have to. There was always the chance that it was just some normal critter checking me out of curiosity. That thought was shattered when I looked up at the horrible beast stepping out of the woodline. Our eyes locked for a moment before it raised its head and let out a long howl. "Oh no! Not again!" I muttered, frozen in fear, as I knew there was no way I could outrun this thing. I was in for a fight for my life once again. Fighting for my life against the Dogman. Once again, I found myself in the middle of the forest, far from help, standing face to face with the Dogman. I knew it was the same one I had fought before, as it only had one eye, and there was a scar on its side, right where I had stabbed it with my spear. I turned and faced the beast, pointing the spear at it and taking a bracing stance. When it saw this, it roared and dropped to all fours, slowly making its way towards me with its fangs bared. The closer it got, the more I had to scrunch my nose at the smell of wet dog, urine, feces and death wafted my way. "Come on now, let's not do this," I said, once again giving it a chance to call a truce. It responded with a low growl. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my shaking hands. I knew I probably wouldn't get out of this so easy this time. I might even die. It stopped its advance just a few feet from the end of my spear and began circling me. I never let it get an advantage as I sidestepped and followed its movements. When it would swipe at me with its claws, I would jab at it to keep it at bay. Neither of us giving up any ground. Just then there was a loud boom and the creature yelped. We both looked towards where the sound had come from, and there was a park ranger with a shotgun in hand. His eyes were wide with shock as to what he was looking at, and he worked the action for a second shot. With the Dogman distracted, I arched back and brought the spear down hard, trying to run it through, but it saw me just in time to dodge my attack. Still, it took another slug from the ranger's gun, turned from me and bolted towards my would-be rescuer. A third shot was fired, but the gun was knocked away before the trigger was pulled, smashing it against the bed rail of the truck. Now, the monster stood on top of the squirming man, raking him with its clawed hands and biting down onto his face. All I could do was watch as it jerked its head from side to side, ending the screams of pain and fear coming from the poor man. I took this time to duck into the tree line and hide behind a fallen pine. I hoped that I could make it to the truck and use it to get the hell out of here. As soon as the deed was done, it turned to face me once again. Its maw covered in blood. A confused look came over it as it hadn't expected me to be gone. It let out a snarl in frustration and went to where I had last been and started sniffing. I eased through the brush, trying not to make a sound until I was aligned with the open door of the truck. It sniffed out my previous hiding spot and bounded over the tree, hoping to land on me, giving an aggravated snort when it saw that I wasn't there. And with it now in the woods, I sprinted towards the truck, making it as far as the door before I was impacted from behind. The Dogman grabbed me, digging its claws into my shoulder and side, its teeth finding my shoulder. I screamed in pain, but was in no position to resist. Suddenly, there was a feeling of weightlessness as the ground vanished below me and I was thrown away from the vehicle. Slamming into the ground, I rolled and gasped for breath as it was knocked out of me. It took me a moment to get my bearings as I scrambled to find my spear, my only means of defense. When my hand gripped the pole, I turned to see where the beast was, and it was on me, slashing my chest and rolling me again. Using the momentum, I was up and jabbed with the spear, just missing its throat as the blade buried itself into its shoulder. It roared and bounded back, lifting its injured limb and growling in anger. I crawled back away, blood now leaking from my wounds. I was running out of energy. Panting hard, I settled back against the tree, doing my best to hold the spear up in defense. Time is running out. The Dogman paced back and forth, watching his prey grow weaker by the minute. He had gotten a taste of blood, and he wanted more. The human was too weak to escape, but he wasn't taking the chance. He would wait until his foe couldn't fight back before striking a finishing blow. It was only a matter of time. Finally, the spear dropped, and the human's head slumped to the side. He licked his lips and charged forward, not taking any chances, and would make it in a quick kill. Leaping forward, he opened his jaws wide to taste the human's flesh once more. I watched the beast as it kept its distance. I knew what it was waiting for, and I didn't have it in me to get up and take the fight to it. I had to think of something to end this fight, or I wouldn't make it. But what could I do? A tear rolled down my cheek as I thought about my family and my friends. They would probably never know what had killed me. If my body was ever found at all, that is. If only I had killed it the first time. If only I hadn't taken that first camping trip. If only. Darkness started to creep in, even though I knew it was still hours before night. I was growing weaker, and eventually I couldn't hold up anymore. My arms went limp, and I dropped my head. Now! My voice in my mind screamed, and my head shot up in time to see the beast leap forward. Up came the spear, the blunt end digging into the base of the tree. A look of shock came across the Dogman's face as the blade pierced its chest, running right through its heart. It let out a and kicked away, taking the spear with it as it fell back and tried to pull it out. Blood spurted from its mouth as well as the wound, and eventually it didn't have the strength to move anymore. I stood, summoning all of my strength and will to make my way over, trying my best to ignore the pain. Rolling the creature onto its back, I grabbed the pole and pulled the spear out. Lifting it with my good arm, I rammed it down hard into his neck, repeating this until the head was removed. I weakly kicked it away, dropping my spear, and stumbled over to the truck. My phone had been smashed, and so I hoped there was a radio. There was, and I sent out an SOS, given my location, and hoped that they would get here in time. Once again, I found myself waking up in the hospital, bandage wraps covering my entire torso. My mother and brothers were there, as well as a few friends, including Becca. I was glad to see them and broke down for a moment, thanking God that I had lived through another bout with the Dogman. Wow. Guys and girls, I think I found myself a new favourite author. Absolutely fantastic stuff there, James Williams. Wonderful story. Beautifully put and just characteristically intense. Just the way we like it here at the Forest of Fear. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel further and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. If you haven't subscribed to DMT Forest of Fear, what are you waiting for? Smash the subscribe button, and why not tickle the notification bell whilst you're at it to stay up to date with all DMT Forest of Fear content. I hope you're all well and happy and making the most of a busy week, and above all, remember, be safe, not sorry. Let's get this done.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye. I'm gonna go finish it now.
Bye, Dad.
See ya.